So there is a enormously widespread belief out there, and incredibly harmful misconception. It's a modern spiritualist philosophy or framework. And I just call it a spiritualist framework because it's not belonging to any particular tradition. There are people out there and communities who believe in this framework, and they've gathered all of their information from various sources, various religions and traditions. And when you look at the things they say and what they teach, all of these, spiritual experts per se, these authors and enthusiasts, you notice that you see these concepts repeated over and over again, and they are constantly missing just enormous aspects, enormous, you could say chunks of information, knowledge, completely missing from the original scriptures and traditions. It's like a spirituality that is, teaching one side of the whole story. You have a beautiful pie and you're only eating half of it, ignoring the other half. And this spiritualism tends to consist of a few, 3, 4, 5 primary beliefs or frameworks that are completely misunderstood, misconceptions. They're very harmful and detrimental because they ignore some of the most fundamental rules and aspects of the teaching and of the functions of the universe that are so vital and taught very explicitly in all the major religions, in Christianity, in, of course, the Vedas and in the Pali Suttas. So I'm going to go over these in this talk because this is really unfortunate that we have this here. These ideas that people are explaining are, more or less true, but they're not giving you the whole story. And it's extremely important to have the entire picture. Otherwise, to follow religion only halfway can lead to some serious problems, like when you ignore things like karma. You ignore rules, basic things like impermanence, things like energy control. So one of the frameworks I'm going to start off here is the ascension belief. This is the belief that for these people, only the process of evolution exists. Devolution is not a concept to these people. It's not a concept. And when I was into spirituality and studying these things, manifestation, law of attraction, for me, neither. It was not a concept. What's this devolution thing? What do you mean by that? Is that what I think it means? It's not a concept. Things getting worse, degrading, degenerating, getting older, dying, and ceasing, impermanence, devolving into worse states is not a concept. And yet it is explicitly taught in all the religions. That's why we have the religions in the first place, especially in Buddhism and Hinduism. There are explicit causes for rebirths in lower dimensions, lower planes of existence. Many suttas, hundreds of suttas maybe, explaining, at least in the Pali Canon, explaining what causes rebirth in an animal plane, in a hungry ghost plane, or in hell. Many causes for this, and as well in the Bhagavad Gita and the Vedas. So devolution is not a concept. All these people believe in is evolution. We think, based on from what we can see, usually terrestrially, that the only thing that exists is evolution, and it seems to be that basically things are getting better all the time. If you go back hundreds of years, it's very clear that many things, especially technology, has become extremely sophisticated. We've advanced so much in technology. It's growing exponentially. But the reality is that's just not how it works. If you look at the bigger picture, right? If you look at how humanity has changed over time, the behavior, the societies, the culture, it's not congruent with this idea of evolution. So one question that I think remains unanswered is, if evolution is the only thing that exists, then where did we come from? Is it that beings start from just a very simple, pure, simple form, and then they get a little bit complicated, they evolve into humans, and then they just they get some complications, they go through experiences, and they just return back into heaven, basically? The ascend, right? The whole civilization eventually, after many experiences and lifetimes, just returns and ascends? Or did we come from this? Did we start off really low? Do creatures start really low in the universe, the lowest dimensions of hell, and then they gradually get better and improve and evolve into, all of these terrestrial physical levels, starting from the, mineral, and then plant, then animal, then human, and then ascending into heaven? Is that how it works? So what explains this evolution alone philosophy? Because if you look at really how things have evolved over time, humans only get worse, really. Creatures in nature only get worse if there's no teaching, if there's no dharma, if there's no gnosis, right? Desire only gets stronger. It's a basic thing that the Buddha taught. Our civilization has only gotten more animalistic, more wars. Wars have not been improving. They've been getting worse, more frequent. We haven't gone a single year without war since the past 100 years or so. The human behavior used to be rooted in virtue, and now people don't know what virtue is anymore. A few hundred years ago, virtue was understood as a basic intrinsic belief, and now it's subjective. There's no grounding, objective solution to suffering. There's no objective agreement of what defines virtue. It's all subjective now. But I don't want to go too much into, the statistics on how we're behaving and stuff. You just have to understand the basic rules of this, which I'll get into, because the Buddha taught basic intrinsic laws of existence. Another belief out there is this you create your own reality belief. And in it, there are many people who think that belief is absolute, or belief is, paramount. What do I say? It's, belief rules all. And this just has such a disregard for the most fundamental laws of the universe. So let me get into those laws now. The Buddha taught that the universe consists of three intrinsic, eternal principles. There is impermanence, meaning that whatever exists in the universe is impermanent. It will not last forever. The consciousness might continue, the beings will continue somehow, but everything as a place, as an experience, is impermanent. Right? Your lifespan is impermanent. The life cycle is not linear, it is a cycle. There's impermanence. I believe that's anicca. The Buddha taught also nirvana, which is the cessation of existence. Why don't I get into the next one so that nirvana makes more sense? So the next thing that the Buddha taught was dukkha, or suffering. So this is part of the Four Noble Truths, right? The whole point of this is to end suffering, to find a means out of suffering. So suffering is eternal aspect or factor, because if there's something that's existing, then there's karma. All things that exist have causation. Things don't exist without causation, right? So anything that exists has karma and will ultimately eventually lead to suffering if there's no dharma, which is the way out of suffering. So that karma is actually, the word for it is dukkha, suffering, because of karma. Then the third aspect, so then just to explain this a little bit more though, the cessation, nirvana is the cessation of karma. And if you stop karma, which is causation, then you stop existing entirely, and that's the way out of existence. Out of suffering. The third aspect is anatta, which is non-self. And what this ultimately means is that anything in existence is insubstantial. So there's this intrinsic insubstantiality in all things that are existing. There is no you, there is no me, there is no thing because of impermanence. So these are fundamental laws. You can't ignore causation. You can't ignore that things exist because of causation. So let's look at that basic law of impermanence, for example. So if anything within the sphere of existence or samsara is impermanent, then essentially what we're saying is that it's cyclic, right? I think it's hard to deny that things in nature exist in cycles, right? There is the circle or cycle of life. Everything that exists in a cycle or a circle. Nothing lasts forever. That's the law of impermanence. Everything that's living, and even things that are not living, seemingly inorganic, are impermanent. The world will not look the same after 1 billion years. The Earth may not be here after another 1 billion years. An asteroid could hit it. Something could happen to it. It could lose its orbit. Your lifespan. Here's another 3 fundamental aspects of cycles, is that every living creature goes through this process of evolution. And in this evolution, we have the birth, of course. So things are born, or they occur, they manifest. Then things grow and develop. There's a maturity phase. Or actually, I should say, so as things are evolving and growing, that's the evolutionary phase. But then you reach a pinnacle or a peak, and that's called maturity. That's the middle point of the cycle, where there is a limit to how much something has evolved. So if you take a human, for example, a person grows and then they reach maturity between 33 and 50, and then there's the final stage of decay and death. That's right. Every living creature degenerates, gets older, starts to decay, to deteriorate, and die. So every living thing goes through birth, maturity, over the sustain, and then decay and death. Everything is like that. A planet is a being. Planets don't last forever. Stars are born, stars die. What's a black hole, right? The black hole is a dead star. It used to be a sun of something, some solar system or planet, and then it turned into a black hole. Nothing is forever except for anything that's out of the sphere of existence. So this very process of decay and death, the law that causes things to die in nature, is devolution. Humans and people decaying, deteriorating, getting Alzheimer's disease and dying, that is the process of devolution at a small scale. That's a short scale. Flowers that grow and bloom and then wither and die, that is evolution and devolution together. It's not just the process of evolution. The death, for these things to die, there has to be a law of devolution, a law of decay that manages these cycles that rise and fall. And this is what's so critical to understand, because if things are impermanent, things decay and devolve. And the scales there's a variety of scales, right? It's not just at the individual level. A whole waves of people, societies, civilizations, they grow, they mature, and then they decay and devolve, right? There was the fall of the Roman Empire. There was the fall of this and that. There are many civilizations. You can go back, fall of Greece, Atlanteans, the previous root races. If they're still not here, I mean, they're not here anymore. The Atlanteans aren't here anymore. The Lemurians aren't here anymore because they devolved and decayed and their time had reached its point. And one of these fundamental rules that are taught in scripture are also evident in the physical world. And in science, in physics, this rule is called entropy. And this is actually a very universal rule that clearly demonstrates to us that everything that exists in nature is actually in a process of decaying and getting worse and becoming chaotic over time. We see this with chemical elements. We see this with nature, right? And what the reason why this is happening is because this rule basically states that everything is in a state of decline and decay and chaos if the primary resources or factors and ingredients that keep it alive are not there and they're not working together properly, right? So for an example, what is a desert? A desert is a failed forest, right? A forest is lush with life, with water, with sunlight. The resources are there. Life can grow. And there's a proper ratio of ingredients. There's enough sunlight, not too much. Can't be too cold, can't be too hot. And if the conditions are just right, you can have a beautiful forest. And if the conditions are way out of balance, they're not right. You have too much sunlight, too much heat. It's too dry, there's not enough water, you get a desert. And this idea of entropy is in everything. It's not just nature, it's in us, right? You need food to survive. You need to exercise. You don't want too much exercise, otherwise you'll deteriorate. If you work out too much, your body will eat itself. Your muscles will catabolize and eat itself. If you don't work out enough, then your body doesn't have enough stress and it withers away. You have to fuel your body. You need all of these conditions and ingredients that have to be in play. And so why this is so congruent with the teaching is because a society that doesn't have a religious teaching or a spiritual basis is in a state of deterioration. People who don't have virtue to keep their culture alive and healthy deteriorate out of entropy because they follow desire and addictions. They don't manage their energy properly. They create causes, or rather causation and karma. So entropy is in everything. And to avoid entropy, to live long and prosper, is to follow superior laws of nature. And the Buddha taught this, right? If you follow the superior laws of nature, if you don't create so much karma, if you manage energy and you gather your resources in a good way, you eat healthy food, you speak well, you think well, right? You know, imagine what kind of corruption do we see in a culture as soon as lying becomes a popular thing to do? When one person lies, the other person gets affected by that. And then they pick up that behavior. They start lying. If the whole community starts lying, that becomes a standard. Then it becomes something that you can't function without, because if you don't lie enough, then you don't get what you want. So these virtues are what keep societies alive. And if you don't have virtue, if you don't have dharma, then they just fall apart. One they call them defilements. So you're acting out of defilements. One defilement or I can't remember the word that's opposite of virtue. One wrong action leads to another. and it expands, then it becomes a standard, it becomes part of the culture, and the whole culture or society collapses. So in this you create your own reality framework, there are people out there that basically, some of these people, they believe that they can do anything with the sheer willpower and the sheer concentration or belief alone, right? This belief rules all mentality. So this is a blatant disregard for the basic principles. There's disregard for karma. There's disregard for energy control too. There isn't always a lot of talk on energy in these spiritual communities and people who are very enthusiastic about spirituality. A lot of people don't know about energy, right? So the question is, how can you be so powerful and infinite if you don't even know how to control your energy, right? If you don't even realize that your energy comes from your own sexual fluids and organs, and you're still masturbating and fornicating in the usual animalistic way and having the orgasm, how can you manifest whatever reality you want if you're depleting yourself of the most powerful energy in the universe that your own body harnesses, and you're creating karma for yourself so that the causation for the things that you want are not even on your working toward your benefit, because doing things out of desire and behaving like this creates karma. They don't come, you can't do these things without some kind of causation. So it doesn't make sense. And, it's not like you can, it's not like you're the Brahma here where you can create any universe and create your own rules. Like, there are fundamental rules, as I just explained, that this universe is founded on. So even the gods have to follow these rules. You can't live in a universe where, you really want pigs to fly. So the next day or week or so, with enough of that will and belief, you're going to see pigs flying. It doesn't work that way. So it's as if belief is the only fundamental rule and everything else can be ignored. It's like the universe is not founded on any other kind of intrinsic physical laws or, existential laws. And that's just not how it works. That's just not the case. The universe is more sophisticated, and you have to work in levels here. There are beings who can manifest different kinds of realities where maybe pigs do fly, but it takes a certain amount of time. It takes tremendous power and responsibility. And these are gods doing this. This isn't everyday people. These are gods, and they don't even live in the physical world because they belong to a different dimension. So that's what I mean by existing in different levels, is it's according to your own abilities and state of evolution. There are beings that create civilizations and create worlds or planets, but it took a process to get to that level. There are teachers out there too, apparently, that I've learned recently. And now, one thing is that there are lots of teachers that are very adamant on manifestation, and it's understandable because there are people who just want to live a good life and they want to better attract the things that they desire. But some teachers are basically teaching manifestation of desires and passions as the means to enlightenment. But this seems really contradicting, because, what if your highest passion is an addiction to video games or lust or alcohol and drugs and the usual bad things, right? Things that make your state of mind and your mind worse, more impure, desires that create karma. and habits that deplete your energy, again, karma and energy, then how can that be the means to enlightenment? Yeah, unless you want to create so much karma that you're reborn into a lower world, and then you go through the extremely slow, painful process of devolution to eventually come out the other side enlightened and purified. But that doesn't really make sense, because that's the slowest way to do it, when you could just do it in one life without suffering as much. And pursuing your desires and then being reborn in a lower world is just completely inefficient. It just is not worth it. Why would you want to do that? You don't learn anything new doing that. You just bring yourself back to ground zero. The next belief is that it seems to be that people are more or less taking this idea that that humans and people, creatures, are we are perfect, we are unified, we are beautiful, infinitely powerful beings. So if whoever thinks this in the, immediate, relative, and literal way is completely arrogant, because this is an absolute truth. This is not an immediate relative truth. It might say this in the scriptures. It does teach that there is a Buddha nature, but this is just a gross misinterpretation of the fact that there's a Buddha nature in all beings. Well, if this were true, then there would be no need for the teaching. We wouldn't have to talk about it, study it, and there wouldn't be any distinct stages of enlightenment, because, well, as they say, we are perfect. We are infinite, unified. So why would you need to work on yourself? You don't have to do anything. And I guess it brings me back to the point that these people, at the very least, they think, well, maybe you're not totally perfect, but we can realize it eventually. Eventually, everyone's going to ascend and we'll get to heaven that way. But then you're ignoring impermanence and devolution. So the idea that we are perfect, infinite human beings, it is technically a truth. This is a spiritual truth, but this is an absolute truth. It's not something that you can immediately apply right now, because right now we're not lucid all the time. We do dream. We forget our dreams. We're not always able to control these dreams. We live in the physical world. We have plenty of desire, a lot of lust, a lot of anger. We lack self-control. So obviously we're not perfect, right? And this is why explicitly in Buddhism, the term for this is a Tathagata Garbha, right? This is not Tathagata by itself, right? The Garbha is a seed or an embryo. It's a tiny seed. So everyone has a Tathagata or Buddha nature, but that Tathagata is a Garbha. So it's a seed. It's just a seed. It hasn't grown. You're not developed, right? We as a race are not developed. We're animals. That's why we fornicate. That's why we still have the orgasm. That's why we have wars. So we need to cultivate love, and we have to work on ourselves a lot. It's a rigorous work. It takes effort. You can't just pursue your desire, because that will actually slow down your progress tremendously. Desire creates karma. So we are Tathagata Garbha, meaning that the Buddha nature inside needs to be developed. And that's why we have the teaching. We follow the Eightfold Path and all that, all these steps. We understand the Four Noble Truths, and we gradually work towards these various four distinct stages of enlightenment. At least in Buddhism, there are four stages and these are just ways of organizing. They're not intrinsic stages, but this is how you can spot signs of being enlightened. So it's evident that we are not really perfect and infinite, because if we were, then this world would not have any problems. It would be heaven on earth, and it's clearly not heaven on earth right now. So it's an intrinsic truth that must be realized eventually. It's not fully realized right now. It's not developed. And part of the reason why people think that we are infinite and perfect is because there are so many near-death experiences of people saying that, oh, the only thing that exists is love and peace, and consciousness continues, and we must be that we are perfect because when you get there, you have no problems, and you're just embraced with so much love by your guides and even relatives and friends. And yet, a lot of these experiences are coming from devolution, which is it's a false plane. Devolution is a vacation plane. You see all of the things you desire. It's like it's a reward in a sense. You usually earn devolution, and you can feel a lot of love from the entities there, but the entities there are not real beings, actually. They're projections of your desire. People you want to reunite with, people you've wanted and yearned for in your life, and other things. And you get all that, but they're not real people. And then that causation for that expires, and you go back to where you were before. The only reason why people experience all of that love and sometimes radiance and bliss is because the death process is a number of stages of Bardot's. And so what's happening is people are just reviewing their life, and they're in samadhi. So your consciousness is only temporarily taken out of the terrestrial domain and the astral plane, and it's elevated to the level of samadhi so it can have a life review. And you do this with your guides, your mother and father, your divine mother and father. So most of the time when you're reviewing your life, you're in samadhi, and it's an amazing state of unconditioned consciousness. And people are taking that as, oh, this is it. I'm in the afterlife, I'm in heaven, I'll be here forever. And that is not the case. You're just going through a life review. So these are all mostly half-truths that I'm talking about here. You have to understand the whole doctrine when you're studying this. And what so many people are doing is they're listening to the next person who was listening to the next person, whoever, somebody, Mr. Mrs. expert on some subject who studied a thing or two from, a tradition. And so this information is getting passed along and along and over. It's like telephone talk phenomenon. You just lose more and more information as people pass it on more and more over time. So you're missing the whole story. Everything that I'm explaining here can be very easily pointed out, demonstrated from scripture. These are all based on facts. There's no personal opinion in this. This is how it is. Both from scripture and also from your own experience. If you really meditate and to confirm what I'm saying is true, you'll see that it's true. Right? Because this belief idea that you can create your own reality and it's all completely based on belief, this is such a new concept. Right? The books did not teach it this way. The traditions aren't teaching this. At least a few decades ago. Nowadays, you can go to temples and learn about how to manifest, like Buddhist temples, and it's kind of shocking and unfortunate that they're teaching manifestation as the primary, doctrine, when really it's not about getting what you want. Buddhism is about finding the means to ending suffering, finding the cessation to suffering. And it's not in pursuing your highest passion. It's not in pursuing desire. It's not in thinking that you're the most infinite, powerful, manifesting God who can create whatever reality they want, because the whole problem of existence is wanting things and being attached. Wanting creates karma. Acting on your passion and your desires creates karma. Perpetuates existence. Leads to suffering. So I think that's all I have to say primarily on this topic. I mean, I could go a little bit, I could go on longer and explain this better if I had more time to premeditate on it and really think about the most important points and breaking down each point with more facts and examples. But as a quick talk and overview, this is the most important thing to be aware of, is that you need the fundamental teaching to be spiritual in a very complete way. So as good as cherry picking from different traditions is good, you have to make sure that everything is congruent, and that if there's any negative information or something that's discomforting that you'd rather avoid, you really should look into it, read it, listen to it, and consider it. Because, as I said, the things we don't want to hear are explicitly taught in Buddhism, and they're taught in Hinduism, and in Christianity as well.